So, hello. Ito na ang ating last lecture video for the midterms. Ito nang before our midterm exam. So midterm exam natin, gaya na sabi ko, na-announce ko anong araw ba yung midterm exam natin? It's on April 14. So yun, April 14 ang midterm exam natin for CFAS and April 17 for Oblicon. So, ito na yung last lecture video natin for the midterms. So with that, let's go with our discussion. Provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets. Ito paglabas sa board exam, mostly theories to siya. Paano ang theories? Ito. Now, provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets is governed by IAS 37. And it shall be applied by all entities in accounting for provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets. However, it cannot be applied or hindi siya pwede proper application na kung saan it resulted from executory contract. So take note, executory contract is different from an executed one. Kasi ang executory contract meaning wala pang performance na nangyari from the parties, or if ever man nagkaroon ng performance, hindi siya significant. Magiging executed, siya? Executed contract kapag may performance na, significant performance. Pero this executory, kaya nga executed, di ba? Executory, wala pa. Except for the contract is onerous. Now, take note, onerous contract basically means na both parties may obligation. Both parties may obligation kasi may tinatawag din tayong gratuitous, di ba? Yung sa mga donation, gratuitous, kung saan freewheeling na binigay for the benefit of another. Pero pag executory contract, wala yan. Pero kapag yung executory contract is onerous, then isama mo. And those covered by another standard. Diyan sila sinasama. So, anong objective ni IAS 37? Basically, IAS 37 provides that ang gusto niyang mangyari to ensure that appropriate recognition criteria and measurement bases are applied sa provisions, sa contingent liabilities, and sa contingent assets. And second, in order to mandate sufficient information na dapat ma-disclose in the notes to enable users to understand their nature and timing and amount. Kasi yung mga provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets, medyo murky yung kanilang existence because of the probability in them. Paano? O kasi kailangan ng appropriate recognition kasi medyo siya eh. Pagdating sa mga IAS 37, pagdating sa mga provisions, contingent liabilities, and contingent assets, medyo alanganin yan siya. O medyo murky yan siya. Hindi siya yung virtually certain. O, doon na. Ito, definition of terms. Provision, a liability of uncertain, di ba? Hindi siya virtually certain. So, may mga uncertainties yan siya. Kaya kailangan make sure na properly disclosed, properly accounted for. Kasi provisions, it is a liability with uncertain timing or uncertain amount. So, tandaan nyo, either lang sa dalawa. Kasi pag naging present siyang dalawa, then it is considered to be contingent liability. So, dapat isa lang. Liability definition, a present obligation of the entity, alam na natin to, arises from past events, settlements of future, with an outflow of economic benefits, di ba? Obligating event, an event that creates a legal or constructive obligation na kung saan it results to an entity having no realistic alternative but to settle the obligation. Kaya nga, obligating event eh. Legal obligation, an obligation that is derived from contract, legislation, or other operation of law. Ito, definition ng constructive obligation kung saan ito is an obligation that derives from an entity's action kung saan based on their actions, ito yung nangyayari. Where by an established pattern or past practice, published policies of or a sufficiently specific current statement, the entity has indicated to other parties that it will accept certain responsibilities. Kapag kilala ka na sa ganyang gawain, basically ganun. Kapag kilala ka sa ganyang gawain, alam nila na ganyang ginagawa mo, may expectation na on your part na ganun yung gagawin mo based on your past practices. And as a result, the entity has created a valid expectation, gaya na sabi natin, on the part of those other parties that it will discharge those responsibilities. So, may expectation on your part. Ngayon, ito naman yung definition ng contingent liabilities under the definition of terms. A possible obligation that arises from past events. Tandaan nyo, possible obligation. Possible obligation, yan yung keyword pagdating sa contingent liability. Possible obligation that arises from past events and whose existence will be confirmed only by the occurrence or non-occurrence of one or more uncertain future events not wholly within the control of the entity. Basta yun yung kay contingent liability, possible obligation. Possibility lang. It is a present obligation that arises from past events pero hindi siya nire-recognize. Bakit hindi siya nire-recognize? Kasi ito, walang probability or it is not probable that an outflow of resources embodying economic benefits will be required to settle the obligation or the amount of the obligation cannot be measured with sufficient reliability. Yan yung reason bakit si contingent liability hindi nire-recognize but rather, as we will know later, dinidisclose lang because possible lang siya. Ito naman kay contingent asset, possible asset lang siya. Hindi siya probable, hindi siya virtually certain, but rather possible asset lang siya that arises from past events and whose existence will be confirmed only by the occurrence or non-occurrence of one or more uncertain future events not wholly within the control of the entity. So as you can see, based on this, di ba? Contingent assets, contingent liability, and provision, meron uncertainty in their nature, may uncertainty. Hence, mayroon tayong IAS 37 in order to account for that uncertainty in order to account for that uncertainty. Kaya mayroong IAS 37 para ma-properly accounted for. So, onerous contracts, a contract in which the unavoidable cost of meeting the obligation under the contract exceed the economic benefits expected to be received from it, and restructuring program, ito yung program na pinaplano or a program that is planned and controlled by management and materially changes either the scope of business undertaking by an entity and the manner in which that business is conducted. Diba? Pag nagbabasa kayo ng mga news, may nakita kayong restructuring program ng mga entity. Usually, ginagawa yan ng mga entity na kung saan hindi maganda yung performance nila or bankrupt na sila. Di ba? Nag-declare na silang bankruptcy. So, kung magkakaroon sila ng restructuring program, ito na yun. Ngayon, ito yung, nag-aaway yung mga pusa. Wait lang. Huwag tayo mag-aaway. Go. So, ito classes of liabilities. Ito, aware naman tayo dito. Trade payables, sa pag-usapan natin ito last time, these are liabilities to pay for goods and services that have been received or supplied and have been invoiced or formally agreed with the supplier. Diba? Trade payables yan. Yung isa, non-trade payables, kasi yung non-trade payables, it arises from the financing activities. Trade payables arises from the operations. Accruals, ito yung mga liabilities to pay for goods and services that have been received or supplied pero hindi pa binayaran. Invoice or formally agreed with the supplier. Provisions, ito yung pinag-uusapan natin. Ito yung may uncertainty. Liabilities with uncertain timing or amount. Pero kinoconsider pa rin siya as present obligation na may probable outflow of economic benefit. Yan si provisions. On the other hand, si contingent liabilities, ito yung mga hindi nire-recognize. Hindi siya nire-recognize, pero dinidisclose lang siya. Bakit hindi siya nire-recognize? Gaya nasabi din kanina, kasi nga, possible obligation lang siya. Hindi siya probable. And present obligations that do not meet the recognition criteria in the standard. Ito yung reason, no? As we have said. Ito. Paano tinirecognize yung provisions, yung contingent liabilities, and yung contingent assets? Provisions shall be recognized when all are present. And ito, di ba? As you can see, similar to sa similar or identical to sa recognition of liabilities na napag-usapan natin sa payables, di ba? And sa previous video, an entity has a present obligation, whether it's legal or constructive, as a result of past event. May probability, or there's a probable. It is probable that an outflow of resources embodying economic activities will be required to settle the obligation. Yan yung pangalawang requirement or requisite. And yung pangatlo, kasi nga nakalagay end. Take note pag end yan nakalagay dyan, ibig sabihin lahat dapat yan. Kapag or, ibig sabihin either lang. And lastly, a reliable estimate can be made of the amount of the obligation. So kung check to lahat, then may provision ka. Present obligation, probable that an outflow, and reliable estimation. Ngayon, on the other hand, contingent liabilities, hindi siya nire-recognize, pero dinidisclose lang siya. Hindi siya sinasama sa sa amount, sa values mo sa excess, pero nasa disclosure siya. Pero, kapag yung outflow of economic benefit is remote, do nothing. Wala kang gagawin. Kasi ang contingent liabilities, possible yan siya. Kasi may hierarchy yan eh. Virtually certain, probable, possible, remote. Si provisions, nasa probable siya. Si contingent liability, nasa possible siya. Kung nag-remote yan, wala kang gagawin. Contingent assets, hindi mo siya din-disclose. Wala yan siya. Hindi siya din-disclose, hindi siya nire-recognize. However, kapag yung probability ng inflow of economic benefit is there, probable. Kasi si contingent assets, same nature yan kay contingent liability. Possible lang. Contingent asset, possible lang din. Pero kapag yung ito, nagkaroon ng probable na, hindi na possible, disclose yan. Sir, may mas madaling paraan ba, sir, para mag-gets yan? Ito, meron tayong table. As you can see, ito yung sa assets. And ito yung liabilities. Flow of resources. Virtually certain na magkakaroon ng flow of resources. Pag assets to the entity. Kapag liabilities palabas ng entity. Di ba? Yung flow of resources. Ngayon, tandaan nyo, iba yung assets sa liabilities, obviously. Yan yung sa assets. Normal asset, kapag yung probability, kapag yung possibility, di ba? Napupunta tayo sa sa statistics ba, no? Kapag yung possibility is virtually certain, di ba? Which is 81% or 99 to 99%, normal asset yan siya. Recognize and disclose sa books. Kapag yung flow of resources is only probable, meaning 51 to 80%, consider yan siya as contingent asset. And contingent asset, as you have said, is only disclosed in the notes. On the other hand, kapag yung flow of resources only possible, meaning 10 to 50% lang yan, ignore, no recognition disclosure. Sa remote, pag naging remote yan, obviously, ignore rin, no recognition disclosure. Ganyan sa asset. And makikita nyo, mas stricto yung asset as compared sa liabilities. Kita nyo Liabilities, ito, virtually certain yung flow of resources outside or outflow sa entity, outflow. Normal liability, recognize and disclose. On the other hand, kapag probable lang yan, 51 to 80%, provision ang tawag yan. Yan yung sasabi ting probable outflow. So, recognize and disclose pa rin siya. Kapag possible yan siya, contingent liability yan, disclose only in the notes. Disclose only in the notes. Kapag naging remote na, no recognition disclosure. As you can see, ito na. Makikita nyo, okay, dito virtually certain, normal. Pagdating ng probability, pagdating ng probable, kita nyo, contingent asset siya. Wala tayong kasame or kapareho ng provisions when it comes to assets. Bakit ganyan yan, sir? Kasi bakit contingent asset agad? Yung contingent liability sa possible pa. Ang contingent asset, kapag probable, disclose lang. Kapag possible, ignore. Di ba? Bakit ganyan, sir? Because of conservatism. Di ba? Tatandaan nyo, ilang beses ko inulit yung concept conservatism. When it comes to asset, stricto tayo. Sobra tayong stricto. Iniiwasan natin yung overvaluation. When it comes to liability, stricto tayo. Iniiwasan natin yung undervaluation. Meaning, kailangan mong i-disclose lahat ng liabilities mo. Wala kang itatago. Kasi diba, as we know, pag tinitingnan natin yung FS, medyo pangit tingnan pag mataas yung liability. So, ang problema dyan, undervaluation, di ba? Kaya, pagdating sa conservatism principle, stricto tayo dito. Oo, lalo na stricto tayo sa recognition of, napaka-stricto natin sa recognition of assets. Hindi basta-basta nire-recognize o hindi tayo basta-basta nagre-recognize ng asset. Kaya makikita nyo dito, yung nire-recognize lang natin is yung mga virtually certain assets. Yung mga probable, dinidisclose na lang natin. Yung possible remote, ignore. Pero makita nyo, sa liabilities, gusto natin ipakita, gusto natin i-present, o ayaw natin magtago ng liabilities for proper presentation. Kaya makita nyo dito, kahit ang probable lang yan, i-recognize pa rin natin yan as provisions. Kapag possible na lang, nagdi-disclose pa rin tayo. Kapag remote lang, tsaka lang tayo nag-i-ignore. So, yan yung reason. Ngayon, pa natin in-estimate ang provisions. the amount recognized as provision shall be the best estimate. Yan yung gagamitin mo. Paano ma-determine yan? Judgment of the management of the entity. Uncertainties on the best estimate, ito yan. Kapag it involves large population, expected value method. Matatandaan nyo sa management subject nyo, paano ito kinumpute, di ba? Continuous range of possible outcomes, yung midpoint of the range. Kapag single obligation is measured, lalo na sa mga litigations, di ba, sa korte, yung most likely outcome. And it should be measured before tax. So kung after tax yan, work back mo. Kapag time value of money is material, present value mo. Future events shall be reflected in the amount of provision where there is sufficient objective evidence that will occur. Ngayon, when there's an expected disposal of assets, gains from the expected disposal of the asset shall not be taken into account in measuring a provisions. Ngayon, paano pag nagkaroon ng reimbursements? Meaning, yes, may babayaran kang obligation, pero in the future, alam mong mababawi mo yun through a reimbursement. For example, sa insurance, di ba? Alam mo mababawi mo. Kahit na may obligation ka babayaran, alam mo mababawi mo. Reimbursement yun. Now, paano mo ini-account? When reimbursement shall be recognized only when it is virtually certain na may reimbursement ka talagang marireceive at the first place. And second, the reimbursement shall be treated as a separate asset, meaning it shall not exceed the amount of the provision. So hindi mo siya i-write off or isi-set off. It will be recognized as a separate asset. So parang receivable, di ba? Changes in and use of provisions. Now, provisions shall be reviewed at the end of each reporting period and adjusted to reflect the current best estimate. Ito naman yung accounting for provisions, di ba? Alam nyo na, yung warranties, di ba? Warranties, ito yun sila, yung formula niya. Ito naman yung sa premiums. And ito yung sa mga lawsuits, mga litigations, most likely amount. So, continuing with our discussion sa provisions, sa topic na to, provisions shall be reviewed at the end of each reporting period and adjusted to reflect the best estimate. Kasi nga, as itong provisions na to, it is highly dependent talaga to sa estimate more than sa other types of accounts. Kasi, uncertain to siya, di ba? Tapos, if it is no longer probable that an outflow of resources embodying economic benefits will be required to settle the obligation, then i-reverse mo na ang provision. So, ito, additional notes na lang doon sa nasabi kanina. If a customer has the option, ito, in regards to warranties and guarantees, kung si customer may option to purchase a warranty separately, ibig sabihin, hindi sa kasama or hindi sa bundled with the product, ways for that, or example yan, because the warranty is priced or negotiated properly, separately. Kasi di ba may mga warranties na kasama sa product, may mga warranties na kailangan separate mo bilhin. Di ba yung Shopee guarantee, di ba? Meron yung kung gusto mo idagdag, separate yun. And sa yung mga premium warranties, di ba? Pag example, nakabili ka ng bagong laptop sa Asus. Sa Asus, mayroon additional warranty na i-offer sa'yo to extend it. So, yung mga separate yun. So, that is an option to purchase a warranty separately. In those cases, the warranty is accounted for under CFAS 15, revenue from contracts with customer. On the other hand, kapag wala yung option na mag-purchase ng warranty separately, meaning bundled siya sa product, kasama siya ng product kapag binili mo na, then it is accounted in accordance with this provision, PS 37. Unless the promised warranty provides the customer with the service in addition to the assurance that the product complies with agreed upon specifications. Going to liability for premiums. A customer option to acquire additional goods services for free or at a discount is accounted under PFRS 15, revenue from contracts with customers. Kung yung option daw provides a customer a material right, yeah? A material boy, customer a material right, the customer would not receive without entering into contract. Ibig sabihin, material right siya, kasama siya. However, on the other hand, a customer option that does not provide the customer with a material right is not accounted for under PFRS 15 but PS 37. Ito, guarantee for indebtedness with others. Ibig sabihin, ginawa kang guarantor. Oo, ikaw yung backup pag hindi nakabayad si debtor. A provision for the guarantee for indebtedness of others is recognized when it becomes probable that the entity will be held liable for the guarantee, such as when the original debtor defaults on the loan. So, pag insolvent na yung original debtor, lagot ka. Ikaw, being the guarantor, naging probable na yung possibility na ikaw magbayad ng utang. So ito, let's go to the application of concepts. So according to PAS 37, to number 1, a provision daw is alin dito sa choices. Present obligation that cannot be measured reliably. A possible obligation that arises from past events. A liability of uncertain timing amount. Or all of this. So, as we know, gaya na sabi natin, uncertain timing or amount si provision. Number 2, according to PAS 37, contingent liabilities are recognized and disclosed. Yan, contingent liabilities always disclosed. Pende. Disclose only if their expected occurrence is possible. And not disclose if their expected remote occurrence is remote. Letter D. O, yan always disclose. Depende yan. Oo. Depende yan. Kasi nga si contingent liabilities, di ba? Possible yan siya. Possible. O, pero pag remote yan siya, wala, di ba? Ignore ang ginagawa natin tulad ng ginagawa siya ng crush mo. O, yeah. Ito naman, disclose only if their expected occurrence is probable. Na pag probable na yan, kapatid, yeah. Hindi na yung possible. Punta na yan sa provisions. Which of the following statement is correct? A provision is recognized only when it represents a present obligation. An event of transaction that meets both the probable outflow and reliable measurement criteria is always recognized. A contingent asset that is possible is ignored. A contingent liability that is possible is always ignored. Ang tama dito, letter A. Kasi di ba? Contingent asset, pag virtually certain ng asset, di ba? Recognize and disclose. Pero kapag probable lang, yun, disclosure. Pero kapag possible remote, di ba, ignored siya. O possible man yan. O yan. Letter C. So yan lang yung discussion natin for PAS 37. Itong PAS 37, if I remember correctly, since sa liabilities ito siya, ito yung tawag dito? Intermediate accounting part to yan, under sa liabilities. Madali lang yan for PAS 37. Kaya lang yan. So with that, next topic. Okay, now let's go to intangible assets. So, intangible assets is governed by PAS 38 or IAS 38. Ngayon, ano nga ba tong intangible asset? So, separate muna natin sila. Ano nga bang intangible? Ano yung asset? Ang intangible is something that is unable to be touched or grasped. Parang crush mo. Hindi mo matahawakan, hindi magiging sayo. And it has no physical presence. Parang crush mo rin. Yung asset naman, as we have said sa definition natin last time pa, it is a resource controlled by the entity na kung saan yung resource na yan, future economic benefit will flow to the entity and it is resulted from a past event. Yan yung asset. So, i-combine mo yung dalawa, intangible asset, isa itong asset na walang physical presence na abstract. Ito ang definition ng intangible asset according to the standard itself. It is an intangible assets are identifiable non-monetary asset without any physical substance. So, separate natin ulit yung tatlong components ng definition ng intangible assets. Identifiable, non-monetary, and without physical substance. So, identifiable meaning it is separable or arises from contractual or other legal rights. Ibig sabihin, may separate entity siya. May separate identity siya. Sa non-monetary asset, it is wala tong predetermined fixed amount, its value changes over time, and it is tougher to liquidate. Pagdating sa without physical substance, parang yun natin ang synonym niya, it is abstract. Wala siyang physical presence. So yan, pag-combine mo yan, yan yung nature ng isang intangible asset according to PAS 38. Ngayon, anong objective ng PAS 38? Sabi nito, prescribes the accounting treatment for intangible assets that are not dealt with specifically by under standards gaya ng IAS 32 and IFRS 6. Ngayon, paano nire-recognize ang isang intangible asset? Well, as we have said nung PAS 1, since asset siya or since accounting element siya, in order to recognize that, una, it is probable that expected future economic benefits that are attributable to the asset will flow to the entity. And second, yung cost niya can be measured reliably. Ito na yung mga examples ng intangible assets. So, patents, patents, copyrights, franchise, trademarks, brand names, franchises, sales design, computer software, website cost, service size, goodwill, brands, master setting, and customers list. Yan yung mga example. However, may caveat tayo. Ito lang yung mga nire-recognize under PAS 38. Ito sila, cannot be recognized. Ito mga internally generated goodwill, brands, mastheads, and publishing titles, customers list. But take note, hindi lang sila na-recognize kapag internally generated. Kapag pinurchase mo yan, recognize mo yan. Pero kapag internally generated yan, hindi yan nire-recognize. Pero kapag pinurchase mo, recognize yan. Ngayon, pati min-measure ang intangible asset. It is measured initially at cost. Oo, it is measured initially at cost. Ngayon, take note. Anong take note? Merong mga ways on how to acquire intangible asset. Yung una, separate acquisition. Kung saan, fundamentally similar yung pag-account nito o pag-measure nito ng initial measurement sa PPE. Oh, similar sila. Ito, kaya nga, nakalagay ito, purchase price, including importing duties and non-refundable taxes, di ba? Deducting trade discounts and rebates. So, same na same. Any directable attributable cost, sama mo rin. Ito sila. Ito naman, the following are not part of the cost intangible asset. Ganyan sabi natin. Cost of, similar sa PPE, sa initial measurement, di ba? Cost of introducing new product or services, di yan kasama. Cost of conducting new business or conducting business in new location. Administration and other general overhead costs. Costs incurred while an asset is capable of operating in a manner intended by management or has yet to be brought into use and initial operating costs, di ba? Hindi yan sila kasama. Kita nyo similarities nila, di ba? Sa ng PPE. On the other hand, kapag yung intangible asset was acquired as part of a business combination, di ba? If you consider, remember, business combination, IFRS 3, kapag may intangible asset yung si acquiree, sinasama yan siya sa pag-account ng business combination. So, sabi ni IFRS 3, if an intangible asset is acquired in a business combination, yung cost ng intangible asset na yan, fair value at the acquisition date. Di ba? Yan yung ginagamit natin recognition when it comes to IFRS 3 business combination. Ngayon, take note, may mga gaya ng sabi dito, may mga intangible asset si acquiree na hindi niya nire-recognize. However, at business combination, si acquirer i-recognize niya yun. Oo. Yun yung sabi. Kasi, yun yung sabi ni IFRS 3. If you can still remember. Another way of acquiring intangible asset, kung saan magano ka ng initial measurement is galing sa acquisition by way of government grant. This may happen when the government transfer or allocates costs or allocates to an entity intangible assets gaya ng airport landing rights, licenses to operate radio or television stations, RPA-BCBN, import licenses or quotas or rights to access other restricted resources. Sabi dito, initially measured at fair value. Entity does not recognize fair value, the entity. So, basta simple lang itong intangible assets. Wala itong problema pagdating sa board exam. Kasi pagdating sa board exam, ang problem ng ang intangible asset to, tiris to siya. Another way of acquiring an intangible asset is to exchange of asset. Diba? Similarities talaga sila sa PPE. Ito yung sasabi. When there's commercial substance, may hierarchy tayo ng pag-measure ng na-acquire mong intangible asset. Fair value of the asset given up. Pag wala yan, fair value of the asset received. Pag wala rin yan, carrying amount of the asset given up. On the other hand, kapag walang commercial substance, then yung cost ng intangible asset mo will be carrying amount, yung gagamitin mong valuation is yung carrying amount of the asset given up. Ito pag may commercial substance, ito pag wala. And lastly, when that intangible asset is internally generated, gaya ng mga patents, di ba? Gaya ng mga patents, internally generated yan, copyrights. Possible yan sila for internal generation. Now, in that case, meron tayong process para dyan. To assess whether internally generated intangible assets meets the criteria for recognition, ang gagawin ni entity will classify the generation of the asset into two, research phase and yung development phase. Excuse me po. Research phase and development phase. Ika-classify niya yan. Sa research phase, expense immediately when incurred. Kasi nagre-research ka pa lang eh. Wala ka pang nararating. Yeah? If the problem is silent, assume na ang sinasabi dyan is research phase. Yung sinasabing process, assume na research phase when the problem is silent. Ito mga examples. Activities aimed at obtaining new knowledge. The search for evaluation and selection of application, research, finding of or other knowledge, the search for alternatives for materials, devices, products, processes, systems, or services, and the formulation, design, evaluation, and final selection of possible alternatives for new or improved materials, devices, products, process, systems, and dami binabasa. So yan yan research phase. On the other hand, may tinatawag tayong development phase. Sa development phase, an intangible asset arising from development phase shall be recognized if and only if an entity can demonstrate all of the following. Dapat, our meaning yan, lahat ito present in order to recognize an intangible asset in the development phase. Kasi diba, pag research phase, expense immediately. Pero pag development phase na, dapat lahat to sila present in order to recognize the intangible asset. Una, technical feasibility, intention to complete, ability to use or sell, generate probable future economic benefits, availability of adequate technical, financial, and other resources, and ability to measure reliably the expenditure. So yan, dapat present yan sila, 6 sila. Note if the problem is silent on whether certain expenditure or process in the development phase meets all the criteria above, the said expenditure shall be assumed to not have met the criteria for capitalization. So basically, kapag malabo yung expenditure under development phase, kasi na hindi sinasabi na it meets all the criteria, assume na hindi siya kasama ng criteria for capitalization, so expense yan. Ngayon, napag-usapan natin ang initial measurement, let's go to subsequent measurement. Similar din sa PPE, gaya na sabi natin, similar talaga sa PPE. Cost model and revaluation model. Ngayon, ang intangible assets para rin siyang PPE, same concept sa depreciating ng PPE, pero ang tawag lang natin is amortization. Ina-amortize natin ang intangible asset. So, similar lang yung concept nila. Ngayon, the entity shall assess whether the useful life of an intangible asset is finite or indefinite. Or finite or indefinite or indefinite. Mas maganda pronounce finite. So, finite or indefinite. Kapag indefinite, meaning no foreseeable limit to the period over which the asset is expected to generate cash flow sa entity. Sa finite, ibig sabihin, parang kaya na shota mo, hindi pang habang buhay, the useful life of an intangible asset that arises from a contractual legal right shall not exceed the period of the contractual right or legal rights. Binabasa na lang natin. No? Kasi ganyan makasimple si intangible assets. Understandable agad yung concept niya. Ito naman, basahin si renewable legal life. Ito, amortization. Basic lang yung sa amortization. Same lang sa idea ni depreciation. Ngayon, ang intangible assets as provided by IAS 36 or PAS 36 impairment, ini-impair din natin siya. Ini-impair din natin si intangible assets kapag upon assessment at the end of the reporting period, nagkaroon ng impairment, i-impair mo siya. Yun ang sabi ni IAS 36. Ngayon, as we have said, sabi ni IAS 36, there is impairment when the carrying amount is greater than the or exceeds the recoverable amount of the asset. And recoverable amount, as we have said, is the higher between the fair value less cost to sell and the assets value in use. So, ito, recoverable amount, familiar naman tayo sa concept na to. Retirement and disposal, ngayon, dinirecognize natin as with other assets, dinirecognize natin ang intangible asset kapag dinispose mo na siya or wala ng future economic benefits that is expected from the use of the, So, the recognition, di ba? Madali lang ito So, yan yung, basically, ito yung ginamit kong PPT nung nag-demo ako for the job application as a teacher sa WIMSO. So, yan lang yung natin. Intangible asset. Madali lang ito siya. If lalabas sa board exam, tiris to ang question sa kanya. Okay, now, let's go to the application of concepts for intangibles. So, ito. Noong January 1, 2001, si Entity A registers a patent for a total registration and legal cost of 600K. Entity A estimates that the patent has a remaining useful life of 25 years. Now, the question is, how much is the carrying amount of the patent? How much is the carrying amount of the patent on December 31, 2001? So, paano to? Amortize natin si patent. Ngayon, tandaan nyo na yung legal life ng isang patent, maximum 20 years lang yan. Maximum 20 years lang. Nakalagay dito, 25 years. So, alin ang susundin natin? Yung shorter. Yung shorter between the useful life and the, and the legal life of the patent. So, dito, Hindi 25 years ang gamitin natin, but rather 20 years. So, 600. Simple lang, di ba? Kahit hindi natin ito sulatin. Tapos wala siyang residual value. So, wala. Diretso sa divided by 20. Kasi nga, 20 years lang yung legal life. The shorter between the legal life and the useful life. Okay? So, that is 600 divided by 20. Siyempre, sa accountants tayo, gamit siyempre ng calculator, 30. Ngayon, 30 yung amortization niya per year. So, ang tanong kasi, ano yung carrying amount after 1 year? So, minus mo lang sa 600, that is 570, di ba? Minus mo lang sa 600, or dito lagay natin 600, o equals to 570. O, letter B. Ba, basic ng amortization yan, no? Next, let's go to number 2. Itong namang si entity A, nag-incur ng following costs during 2001. Okay, testing in search for evaluation of product, adaptation of an existing capability to a particular requirement or customer needs, design construction and pre-testing, and testing of pre-production prototypes, and routine design tools for jigs or routine design of tools, jigs, molds, and dies. So, how much the research and development expense in 2001? So, isali lang natin dito, based on the list is 300 lang, and 620. Add mo yan sila, that is 920, letter B. Number 3, if it is not clear whether an expenditure is a research or development, it is treated as a research cost, automatic. Dapat klarong-klaro ma-check yung mga requirements or yung mga requisites before it will be treated as development. Di ba? Nasabi yan kanina. So with that, yan lang yung discussion natin for intangible assets. Next topic tayo. Okay, now let's go to investment property, PAS 40. So itong next discussion natin. So, investment property tayo. So, anong learning objectives natin dito? Una, define what is an investment property. Pangalawa, state the initial and subsequent measurement ng isang investment property. And lastly, apply the fair value model of accounting for investment property. So, ano nga ba tong investment property? Sabi ni PAS 40, an investment property daw is a property kung saan yung property na to is either a land or a building or a part of the building or both land and building. So, ibig sabihin, combination sila. That is held by the owner. Nagbubulol tayo. That is held by the owner or by the lessee. Di ba? Sa lessor, lessee. Si lessor yung nagpaparenta. Si lessee yung nagre-renta. Ganun yan kasimple explanation. Under a finance lease. Kasi itong leases natin, konting additional note. Dati, IAS 17 to siya. Pero may bago na tayong standard for leases which is IFRS 16. So since PFRS 16, so sa second quarter pa yan siya. So by the owner or by the lessee under a finance lease, kung saan yung purpose nila is to earn rentals or for capital appreciation or both. So tandaan nyo, ang purpose is to earn rentals or capital appreciation. Yan ang isang investment property. Kung saan, on the other hand, it is kapag yung purpose naman is used in the production or supply of goods or services or for administrative purposes or a sale in the inventory in the ordinary course of business, in the ordinary course of business, yan hindi na siya makukonsider as investment property. Bakit? Kasi as we know, this IAS 16 to, PPE na to siya. Ito naman, sale in the ordinary course of business. That is inventory, kapatid. IAS 2 yan. So, di ba? Tignan nyo, investment property. Property siya that is held for the purpose of earning rentals or capital appreciation. Kapag ito na yan siya, using the operations, IAS 16 yan, PPE. Kapag ginamit na siya, sale in the ordinary course of business, that is IAS 2, inventory. So, tandaan nyo, investment property, ulitin natin. Property siya na kung saan you're holding it for the purpose of earning rentals or capital appreciation. Capital appreciation meaning hinintay mong tumaas yung value niya. Oo, yun yung purpose mo, tumaas yung value niya. Like di ba? Ngayon, magandang investment ng lupa, di ba? Kasi ang lupa, hindi siya nagde-depreciate. Umaangat lang yan. Tumataas lang yung value niya. Sir, if that's the case, bakit may mga lupa na bumababa yung value? So, hindi na depreciate. Hindi depreciation ang tawag doon, but rather impairment. Impairment of land. Iba ang impairment sa depreciation. Tandaan yan. So, generally, ang value ng lupa, tumataas lang yan. Kaya magandang investment yan. Capital appreciation yun. Bumababa lang ang value niyan kapag mayroon ng impairment. So, tandaan nyo lang difference ng impairment sa depreciation. Okay? So, yan na. Investment property according to PAS 40. So, ito. Differentiate lang or difference lang ng investment property sa PPE that is classified as owner-occupied property. Owner-occupied property. So, pag owner-occupied property yan, PPE yan ha. So, sa investment property, gaya na sabi natin kanina, yung purpose niya is to earn rentals or capital appreciation. Pwede rin both sila. On the other hand, yung owner-occupied property, PPE, ginagamit mo siya. You're holding it for the purpose of production or supply of goods or services or for administrative purposes, meaning for operational purposes. Owner-occupied yan. On the other hand, investment tayo, generates cash flows largely independent of the other assets that is held by the entity. Investment property yan. Ito namang PPE, owner-occupied, generates cash flows in conjunction with the other assets held by the entity. Kasi nga, ginagamit mo sa operations yan eh. So, integrated yan with the other assets. Kasi ginagamit mo yun sa production. Ginagamit mo yun sa operations. Balik tayo sa investment property. Includes only land and building. Yan lang yung pwedeng isama sa investment property. Sa owner-occupied property, marami kang pwedeng isama dyan. Hindi lang land and building, machineries. Diba? Equipment. Mga kotse nyo. O PPE yan. Diba? Sa investment property, land or building lang. Hence, it is dito, accounted siya under PS 40, investment property. Ito naman si owner-occupied, PS 16 yan. PPE. Ito mga examples ng investment property. Ito, mga land held for long-term capital appreciation rather than short-term sale in the ordinary course of business. Bakit? Kasi pag short-term sale yan, in the ordinary course, ano yan? IS2, inventory. Letter B, land held for currently undetermined for future use. Yes, that is investment property. Tandaan nyo, dapat merong undetermined for future use. Kasi pag naging determined dyan, di na yan. Kung alam nyo na kung anong gagawin nyo dyan sa building, hindi na siya undetermined, then hindi na siya investment property. Letter C, a building owned by the entity or held by the entity under finance lease. Oo. And kung saan, yung purpose niya for that building is to lease it out under one or more operating lease. So, either you own the building or nasa sayo lang yan because of a finance lease, ikaw si lessee na finance lease, tandaan nyo, and you lease it out on one or more operating leases, then that is considered to be investment property. Parang ganito, di ba? Itong itsura niyan. Ito yung original owner. Di ba? Original owner, OG. Oo. Tapos, nilease out sa'yo on a finance lease. Tapos ikaw, nilease out mo on a operating lease. So with that, considered pa rin yan as an investment property. Okay? Kasi nga, nilease out mo, pero nilease mo on a finance lease, tapos nilease out mo pabalik on operating leases, investment property yan. Tandaan niya na. A building that is vacant but is held to, letter D, a building that is vacant but is held to be leased out under one or more operating lease. Okay lang. Then lastly, property that is being constructed or developed for future use as investment property. So pag kino-construct nyo pa lang, din-develop nyo pa lang, tapos ang plano nyo is investment property, then investment property yan. Ito yung mga examples na hindi mo makonsider as investment property. Ito, property intended for sale in the ordinary course of business that is under IS2, inventory. Or property acquired exclusively with a view to subsequent disposal in the near future or for development and resale. Tawag dito, non-current asset held for sale, PFRS 5. Non-current asset held for sale and discontinued operations, PFRS 5 yan dito sa baba. Letter B naman, property being constructed or developed on behalf of third parties, PFRS 15, revenue from contracts with customers. Ito yung tatawag natin construction contract. Ito, madadaanan itong construction contract sa accounting for special transactions, BAPE 6, pag third year na kayo. Letter C, owner-occupied property, PA 16 yan. And owner-occupied property waiting for disposal. So, dito sa non-current asset held for sale and discontinued operations din tong sa owner occupied waiting for disposal. if depende sa characteristics. Pero madadaanan din natin yan yung si PFRS 5 after ng midterm exam natin kasi second quarter na yun siya. Letter D, property that is leased out to another entity under finance lease. Yan na. Di ba? For example, ito na finance lease different yan dito. Finance lease mo na tapos finance lease mo pa, di ba? Di ba? Parang ganito rin yan. Ganito, OG ka. OG owner. Ikaw may hawak finance lease tapos finance lease mo pa ulit. Hindi na yan pwede. Ito lang pwede. Finance lease, kung saan ni-lease out mo to operating lease. Or diretso ka sa And tandaan nyo, ito rin sa yung operating leases, ikaw yung owner, di ba? So, minsan diretso na yan dyan sa baba. Dito, pwede rin, diretso ka sa baba. Kaso, finance lease mo, bawal din. Basta common sense na lang, pag finance lease, ikaw yung lessor sa finance lease, bawal. Ikaw yung lessor sa operating lease, yun tandaan nyo, okay, goods yun. Investment property yun. Property, ito. Paano naman? Di ba? Sabi natin kasi dito, di ba sa definition pa lang, or a part of the building, or both of them, di ba? Both of them. Land or building, or a part of a building, or both, di ba? So, ibig sabihin, pwede combination. So, ito na yun. Paano pag partly investment property and partly or owner-occupied? Paano yan, sir? Provided naman ng standards kung anong gagawin, di ba? Saan yun? So, if the portions could be sold separately, ibig sabihin, pwede mo silang ihiwalay or lease out separately under finance lease, then an entity accounts for the portions separately. Kung pwede mo silang ma-separate, siyempre, since pwede mo silang separate mo na yung pag-account sa kanila. The portion that being rented out under operating lease is classified as investment and the portion used as owner-occupied is classified as property, plant, and equipment. Kasi nga, pwede mo silang ma-separate. Yeah? On the other hand, kapag yung mga portions, hindi mo pwedeng ma-sold separately. So, yung property, mako-consider mo sa investment property only if an insignificant portion yung nagagamit for production or supply or own of goods or supply of goods or services or for administrative purposes. Meaning, meaning yan? Basically, kukonsider mo siya as investment property kapag insignificant portion yun owner-occupied. I-consider mo siya, ulitin natin, as investment property if yung owner-occupied portion is insignificant. If I remember correctly, yung percentage yan is 2%. 2% is owner-occupied, then investment property pa rin yan. On the other hand, kapag significant, yung 2% naalala ko sa previous Ngayon, if the owner-occupied portion is significant, anong gagawin mo? Then, the entire property is classified as PPE. Hindi mo siya mako-consider as investment property. So, take note of that. Ito naman, ancillary services. Itong ancillary services, mga examples ito is yung utilities, maintenance services ng building, yun, ancillary services yun sila. So, kapag yung ancillary services are provided to the occupants of a property held, the property shall be classified as investment property kapag yung ancillary services is insignificant to the arrangement as a whole. For example, ito, hotels, they provide ancillary services, di ba? They're serving the rooms, utilities, di ba? Cleaning, maintenance. Tatanungin kita, yung ancillary services ba ng hotel, insignificant sa purpose ng hotel? Hindi, di ba? Kasi importante yan. Isa yun sa mga services na provide. So, in that case, the hotel is considered to be PPE. Di ba? Ganon. On the other hand, kapag ito warehouse lang, kung saan may tagalinis ka, o may taga utilities lang, taga maintenance lang, tapos insignificant yun. If that's the case, then investment property yun. Basta yung ancillary services, significant, PPE. Kapag yung ancillary services, insignificant, investment property. Ito naman, let's go to the measurement. Initial cost, subsequent either cost or fair value model. Yan ang cost, fair value model. Ito, the following are excluded from the cost of the investment property and thus will be expensed immediately. Yung mga startup costs, operating losses, yung mga abnormal amounts. Yan, excluded yan sila sa cost. Ngayon, kapag nagkaroon ng changes in accounting policy, kasi tingnan nyo, ang original cost. So, yung subsequent, pwede kang mag-retain sa pagiging cost model or pwede kang tumalon to fair value model. In that case, kapag tumalon ka ng fair value model, then there's a change in accounting policy, hence it will be accounted for prospectively. Tandaan nyo, yung na-discuss natin sa PAS 8. Yeah? So, a change from fair value model to the cost model, hindi ka na pwedeng bumalik. Pag nag-fair value model ka na, hindi ka na pwedeng bumalik. Yung X mo pwedeng mo balikan. Pero dito, hindi mo pwedeng balikan yung cost model. So, determining fair value. So, paano determine yung fair value? So, according to PAS 40, it requires all entities to determine the fair value of their investment property, whether it chooses the cost model or fair value model. So, meaning, kahit naka-cost model ka, sabi ni standard, determine mo pa rin yung fair value model niyan. Determine mo pa rin yung fair value ng property na yan. So, fair values determined are used for measurement and disclosures kapag fair value model ginamit mo. Pero kapag cost model lang, disclosure lang. Oh, yun. Obviously. So, fair value model after initial recognition, an entity, alam niyo naman yung meaning ng fair value, di ba? Ilang beses natin na-mention. Note lang. After initial recognition daw, an entity that chooses the fair value model shall measure all of its investment property at fair value. Oh. Except in cases where the exemptions under PAS 40 apply, so nasa book yan ni Zeus, changes in fair values are recognized sa profit or loss. And since fair value na yung pag-recognize sa property, huwag ka na mag-depreciate. Huwag ka na mag-depreciate. Bakit? Any changes din sa fair value dyan, sa profit or loss yan sa nilalagay. Oo. Kasi ganoon man eh. Fair value model yan eh. Any changes in the fair value, sabi ni standard, sa profit or loss yan diretso. Oh, hindi mo na, kaya no need to depreciate kasi nire-recognize mo agad yung changes sa fair value sa profit or loss. So yan na. If the fair value of an item of investment property cannot be determined reliably on initial recognition, then such item is subsequently measured under the cost model. At naman sa cost model, after initial recognition, an entity that chooses the cost model shall measure all of its investment at cost less any accumulated depreciation, siyempre cost model yan eh, and impairment losses in accordance with PPE or PAS 16. Such items have been measured. Ayan na. So yan yung mga models natin. Don't worry. Ano lang tayo dito? Tiris lang tayo. Introductory purposes para pag dating nyo sa IAS 1 nyo, sa topic nyo sa investment property, kasi IAS 1 tong investment property kasi asset to. So, dun. At least may idea na kayo pagdating doon, di ba? So, ito, punta tayo sa transfer. Siyempre, may mga times na hindi mo na yung makukonsider as investment property because of some significant changes on its nature. So, transfers to or from investment property shall be made when and only when there is a change in use. There is a change in use. Evidenced by, so ito, commencement of owner occupation. So, kapag yung investment property mo, bigla mong inoccupy, so owner-occupied na yon, then, it will be, there will be a transfer from investment property to owner-occupied. So, from PAS 40, naging PAS 16 na yan siya, PPE. Kasi nagkaroon ng commencement of owner occupation as we have said, owner-occupied property is PPE. Letter B, commencement of development with a view to sale. So, view to sale na yan. Ibig sabihin, ibibenta mo. Nag-iba na yung purpose. Instead of rentals or capital appreciation, ibibenta na yung purpose mo. So with that, transfer of investment property to inventory, so from PAS 40 to PAS 2. Or, ito naman, kapag nagkaroon ng end of owner occupation, so from being owner occupied, from PAS 16, naging PAS 40 na siya, investment property. Kasi end of owner. And lastly, commencement of operating lease to another party, so for transfer from inventories to investment property. So nakadepende talaga yun. So with that, let's go to application of concepts. So ito, which of the following assets may be classified as investment property? So ito, land held for long-term capital appreciation. So sabi ito, may be classified. Okay, goods. Equipment held for lease. Hindi pwede kapatid. Bakit? Kasi ang investment property, land or building lang. Equipment to. So, hindi yan. Intangible assets held for lease. Isa pa to. Hindi pwede. Kasi nga, investment property, land or building lang. Building held for lease, yun. Kasama yan. May be classified. So, let's go to number 2. Which of the following is not classified as investment property? So, not classified naman dito. Not classified. So, ano yun? Land held for long-term capital acquisition rather than short-term sale in the ordinary course of business. So, investment property to. Land held for current land determined use, investment property yan. A building owned by the entity or held by the entity under a lease, kung saan lilis niya to in one or more operating lease, so investment property rin to. Itong letter D naman, a property that is leased to another entity under finance lease. So, yun, finance lease. So, letter D, hindi yan investment property. Ay, bakit parati pipindot natin? Number 3, according to PS 40, investment property is measured as follows. So, cost model, initial, then subsequent. So, ito, as you can see, letter A yung correct answer. Cost model yung initial, then pag subsequent measurement na, pwede ka nang pumili, cost model or fair value model. So, dito tayo sa letter ano? Dito tayo ngayon sa ano? Number 4. Entity A acquires a building to be leased out under various operating leases. So, entity A incurs the following costs on the acquisition. So, purchase price, legal service transfer tax, refurbishment before occupancy, occupancy permit fees, property taxes after occupancy, and opening costs, blessing, and feng shui. So, ang tanong, the initial measurement of the investment property. So, initial measurement cost model tayo. And tatandaan nyo, so, ito yung mga hindi pwede sama. Ha? So, startup, si operating lease, and si abnormal amounts. Huwag nyo isasama yan. So, sana yun? So, ang ano natin, si 10 million, kasama yan. Si 10,000 legal service transfer tax, kasama yan. Si refurbishment before occupancy, kasama yan. Si occupancy permit fees, kasama yan. Ito, hindi kasama. Bakit? After yan eh. Ito naman, opening yan. Hindi naman kailangan. So, kaka 500,000 sa opening cost. So, yan. 10 million plus 10 plus 30 plus 25. 10 plus 30 plus 25. So, 1,065,000. Letter C. Okay, let's go to the next. The recognition of investment property is not required when it becomes the subject of an operating lease, it is sold, it is assessed to have no future economic benefits, it becomes the subject of a finance lease. So, anong hindi dyan? Not required eh. So, letter A. Hindi yan required. Ito required, siyempre. Okay, with that, end tayo ng discussion natin for investment property. Agriculture tayo, PS41 next. Okay, so now let's proceed with our last topic for these midterms. So, dito tayo ngayon sa Agriculture PS41. Ngayon, ano nga ba itong learning objectives natin dito? Una, differentiate daw the following. Ano yung biological asset, ano yung bearer plant, and ano yung agricultural produce and inventory. Kasi magkaiba yun sila dalawa, malalaman nyo mamaya. Pangalawa, state the initial and subsequent measurement of biological assets and agricultural produce. And pangatlo, state the accounting for government grants that are within the scope of this standard. So, ano yung scope ng PS41? Ngayon, sabi ni PS41, ito yung mga sakop niya. It is applied to account the following when they, take note, relate to agricultural activity. So, yan kapag they relate to agricultural activity. Sir, paano malaman kung agricultural activity yan? Later on, meron tayong example. So, una, it is applied to biological assets but except for bearer plants. Bakit? Malalaman natin. Biological assets lang na except for bearer plants. So, that can be a biological plant. Or a biological animal. Pero except for bearer plants. Agricultural, produce at the point of harvest. So, specific, at the point of harvest. Bakit? Kasi after harvest, mag-iba na yung classification yan. And third, or lastly, unconditional government grants related to a biological asset that is measured at its fair value less cost to sell. Tandaan nyo? PS41, yung mga initial, dyan? Fair value less cost to sell ang measurement dyan. Ngayon, continuation. Now, PS41 does not apply to the following. Mga land. Kasi either PP yan or investment property or pag nagbebentahan, then PS2. Pangalawa, bearer plans related to agricultural activities. Yun ang sinasabi natin. Kaya nakalagay dito except for bearer plans. Bakit? Kasi under yan sila ng PAS 16 PPE. Diyan yan sila kinoconsider as mga bearer plans natin. Hindi sila kasama. O kaya nga nakalagay dito biological assets except for bearer plans kasi PAS 16 yan sila. PP yan sila. However, PAS 41 applies to the produce of those bearer plans. So kung yung bearer plans mismo is PPE, yung na-produce nila, PAS 41. No? Di ba? Bearer plans. For example, mangga. Mango tree. So, bearer plant siya, di ba? PAS 16 yan. Pero yung na-produce niyang mango fruit, yun. Produce yun ng bearer plants, PAS 41. So, yun na, di ba? May pagkakaiba yan sila. Letter C, government grants related to bearer plants. So, pag gano'n yung nangyari, kasi tandaan nyo, unconditional government grants related to biological asset. Pero kapag it relates to a bearer plant, which is a biological asset, pero except siya dito, so, common sense will tell you, hindi na siya under PAS 41. But PAS 20 na yan. Accounting for government grants and disclosure of government assistance, na-discuss na natin yan previously pa. And letter D, intangible assets. Kasi obviously, they are under PAS 38. So, take note of this. PAS 41 is applied to agricultural produce at the point of harvest. Kaya nasabi natin, may pagkakaiba yan. Magkakaroon ng distinguishment yan. Specific ang sinabi yan. Bakit? Kasi after the point of harvest, PS2 na yan. Inventories or other applicable standard is applied. Kaya nga specific sinabi dito, at the point of harvest. After that, hindi na siya PS41. So ito, nature of asset, living animal or plant. Living animal or plant. Biological asset yan sila. Biological asset, PS41. However, kapag bearer plant siya, diba? Bearer plant siya, classified siya as PP. Kasi sa animal, dalawa yan. Produce and bearer. Sa plant, dalawa rin. Produce and bearer. Ngayon, sa animal, yan dalawa, PS41 yan sila, pasok yan sa agriculture. Sa plant, yung produce plant lang ang kasama, yung bearer, hindi na. Okay? Kasi under na sa PS16. Unprocessed harvested products, agricultural produce yan, 41. Processed harvested products, inventory na yan. Kasi nga mo, process, unprocessed, meaning at the point of harvest pa lang to. Kaya PS41 siya. Pero pag nakita nyo, process, ibig sabihin, after na yan ang point of harvest. So, inventory na yan, PS2. Okay? Alam niyo, tandaan nyo yung difference nila. To. Okay. To. Saan yun? To, biological asset is living animal or plant. Kaya sabi natin. And agricultural produce is the harvested produce of the entity's biological asset. So, produce. So, ito, tingnan nyo. Biological asset. Sheep, fish, to. Ito yung agricultural produce nila. So, di ba? Agricultural produce nila, alam niyo yan. Automatic, HTPM. Tawag dito? Tawag yan? PS41 sila. Pero itong biological assets, tingnan nyo muna. Kung biological animal, living animal, then you can say both of them is under PS41. Pero kapag plant na yan, tingnan nyo ang distinguishment. Kung agricultural produce na plant or bearer plant, kasi doon mag-iiba yung standard nila. Ito, fruit trees. Fruit trees, ano yan sila? Bearer plants yan. Ba? Pero yung produce nila, pig fruits, PS41. Pero pag na-process na yan, then IS2 na yan. Inventories na yan. Ito, live cow, biological asset. Ba? So yan, live cow, biological asset. Pag carcass na siya, pag napatay, di ba? Katayin mo siya, agricultural produce yan. Kasi at the point of harvest, di ba? Kasi kinatay mo na. Ngayon, pag na-process mo na siya, either to corn beef, or inano mo na sa market, or kinuha mo yung niya, yeah? Pinoses mo na yung gatas niya, then that is inventory. So, yan difference sila. Consumable versus bearer biological assets. So, biological assets are either consumable or bearer. Those that are to be harvested or as agricultural produce or sold as biological assets. And those are that, example, timber. Timba! Tapos bearer are those other than consumable biological assets gaya ng fruit trees. Kasi parang ito produce siya or palitan nyo ng produce dito ng consumable. Tapos bearer. Same lang yan sila. Same lang yung concept nila. Consumable. Ito yan sila. So, as we have said kanina, PS 41 applies to both consumable and bearer animals. Kaya nga dito, check sila. Pero, pagdating sa plants, tingnan mo muna kung consumable siya or hindi. Kasi kung consumable siya, PS 41 yan. Pero pag bearer siya, PS 16 yan. So, paulit-ulitan siya sinasabi, repetition is the key. So, ito, maize plant, annual crop, consumable, PS 41. Kasi, di ba, kinukuha mo yan hina-harvest mo yan. Yung mango tree, bearer plant yan. Kasi nga, bakit? Kinukuha mo Oo. Hina-harvest mo talaga yan. Hina-harvest. Pinangkukunan mo yan ng agricultural produce niya. Hindi naman yung mangga yung hinihila mo, di ba? Hindi naman yung puno mismo ang hinihila mo, di ba? Yung fruits niya lang. So ito, indications. Para additional notes ba? Para malaman natin kung bearer plant yan o hindi. Tingnan mo, if the plant is used in the production or supply of agricultural produce, bearer plant yan. If it is expected to bear produce for more than one period, so long term, more than one period so bearer yan. Remote likelihood of being sold as agricultural produce except for incidental scrap, meaning hindi siya consumable. Kasi consumable, di ba? Agricultural produce or sold as biological. So yan di ba? Pag yan sila nandyan, di bearer plant yan. Ginagamit mo sa production. Anong ginagamit mo sa production? PPE, di ba? Expected to produce more than one period. Anong mga long term natin dyan? Mga non-current. PPE, di ba? And remote likelihood of being sold as agricultural produce. Di ba? PPE yan. Kasi hindi mo ginagamit yan pambenta. Ginagamit mo yan pang produce ng ibebenta mo. So ito, nasabi natin kanina na when they relate to agricultural activity, di ba? When they relate to agricultural activity. So paano natin malalaman na agricultural activity yan? Ito, provided naman. PS 41 applies to biological assets, agricultural produce, and government grants only when they relate to agricultural activity, as we have said. So, ano ang agricultural activity? Sabi ni PS 41, it is the management by an entity of the biological transformation of biological assets for sale into agricultural produce or into additional biological assets. So, yan yung meaning ng agricultural activity. Management by an entity sa biological transformation ng kanyang mga biological assets. Kung saan ang purpose niya? Sale. For sale or into agricultural produce or into additional biological assets. Kasi dito, ipag-mate nila, di ba? Para mag-produce sila. Ipang-breed yon. So ito, common features ng agricultural activities. So ito yung mga features ng agricultural activities. Ito yung mga tatlo sila. Capability to change. Living animals and plants are capable of biological transformation, di ba? From being to maturity, di ba? From being mga bata pa sila, di ba? Bagong panganak, tapos mag-grow sila to maturity until nasa breeding na sila or time na sila para katayin yun. Capability of change, biological transformation yun. Pangalawa, second feature is management of change. The management facilitates biological transformation by enhancing or at least stabilizing conditions necessary for the process to take place. Meaning, kailangan dito ng human intervention sa biological transformation na nangyayari sa biological assets mo. Kailangan ng human intervention. Kapag wala yung human intervention, then it is not considered as agricultural activities because that is an unmanaged resources. For example, yung mga fish farm, di ba? Yung mga fish farm, yung may mga net sila, tapos separate nila, yun, manage yun. So you can say na biological assets yun. On the other hand, you can say na agricultural activity yun. On the other hand, yung fishing sa karagatan, Oo, yung hindi sa fish farm, yung fishing sa karagatan mismo. 'Di ba? Sa dagat. Yun, hindi yun agricultural activity. Kasi unmanaged sources yun. Oo, kasi hindi mo naman na-manage yung mga isda sa dagat, 'di ba? Yung na-manage mo yung mga isda sa ponds kasi may mga fish farm kayo, yun, managed resources yun. So that is agricultural activity. Pero kapag sa dagat ka, sa wild kumbaga, then that is not considered as agricultural activities. So yun ang difference nila, management of change. And lastly, measurement of change. The change in quality or quantity brought about by the biological transformation kung saan it is measured and monitored as a routine management function. Like for example, yung growth ng isda, di ba? Yung growth ng isda, ng tilapia. So kapag baby pa siya, halos wala, ang value niya is di ba? Depende sa size. Kung papalaki siya ng palaki ng palaki, pabigat ng pabigat, di ba? Mas tataas yung value niyan. Kasi ma-measure mo yan yung change niya and ma-monitor mo. Sabi mo, ito, malaki na to. So, teenager pa lang itong isda. So, mga 30 pesos yan. Pero pag nag-adult na siya, breeding na niya, o baka mga 100 pesos na yan ang isa niyan. Di ba ganun? So, measurement of change yun. So, yan ang mga common features ng agricultural activity. Ngayon, paano natin ni-recognize or kailan natin ni-recognize ang isang biological asset? Simple lang. Because biological asset or agricultural produce is a asset. Di ba? Asset siya. Paano natin recognize ang asset? Ito na yun. Di ba? Same sa conceptual, na pag-usapan natin sa conceptual framework. Kailan tayo nag-recognize ng asset? Kasi asset naman in the first place, bakit mo pababaguhin yung recognition principle mo? So, entity controls the asset as a result of a past event. Probable that future economic benefits associated with the asset will flow to the entity and the fair value or cost of the asset can be measured reliably. So, yan. Di ba? Asset kasi yan eh. Bakit mo pababaguhin yung principle mo? Ngayon, paano natin siya mini-measure? Sabi, ang biological asset shall be measured, dalawa yan biological asset and agricultural produce. So, ang sabi, ang biological asset daw, on initial recognition and at the end of each reporting period, fair value less cost to sell. Yan yung initial and subsequent, measurement. Fair value less cost to sell. Sa agricultural produce, at initial recognition, harvested from an entity's biological asset, i-measure mo siya at fair value less cost to sell at the point of harvest. Yan sa agricultural produce. Yung subsequent measurement niya, hindi na ganito, iba na. Kasi nga, at the point of harvest lang si agricultural produce. Diba? At the point of harvest lang. Kaya nakalagay dito, fair value less cost to sell at the point of harvest. Kasi afterwards, ibang standard na. And usually that is PS2 inventories. And 'di ba, subsequent measurement ng inventory is LCNRV. Lower of cost and net realizable value. So measurement continuation kapag naman kapag yung biological asset is measured at kapag yung fair value ng biological asset cannot be measured reliably on initial recognition, then cost model yung gagamitin mo. Cost less accumulated depreciation and accumulated impairment loss. Yan yung sasabi. Pag hindi available yung fair value. Ito. Definitions lang muna. Familiar naman kayo dito eh. Fair value is the price that would be received to sell an asset or paid to transfer a liability in an orderly transaction between market participants at a measurement date. Alam natin to, fair value. Ilang beses ito na-repeat sa inyo yung definition niya. Ito naman cost to sell. These are incremental costs directly attributable to the disposal of an asset which excludes finance costs or finance costs and income taxes. So, mga example ng cost to sell. Commissions to brokers, siyempre. Nagbebenta ka, tapos hindi ka yung directly magbebenta ng agricultural produce mo, so mag-hire ka ng brokers. Levies by regulatory agency and commodity exchanges, yung mga patong nila, and transfer taxes and duties. Cost to sell do not include transport costs, advertising costs, income taxes, and interest expense. So, huwag nyo sasali yan dyan. And if location is a characteristics of the biological asset, the price in the principal or most advantageous market shall be adjusted for the transport costs. Yan lang. Definitions lang yan. So, yung gains or losses on initial recognition of the biological asset at fair value less cost to sell and PAM, a change in fair value less cost to sell of a biological asset shall be included sa profit or loss. Profit or loss yung mga changes, yung gains or losses niya. Ito naman, let's go to the government. So, madali lang, di ba? Madali lang yung tiris ng agriculture PS41. Ay, madali lang, di ba? Walang problema. So, ito government grants tayo, di ba? Sabi kanina, may government grant tayo. And meron yung government grant dito, pero nakadepende sa purpose ng government grant. Di ba? So, ito yung purpose nila. Nature of the government grant. Kapag yung government grant is unconditional, so yung una, unconditional, and it also relates to a biological asset that is measured at fair value less cost to sell, yung accounting procedures yan, ito na. Recognize income equal to fair value of the grant when the grant becomes receivable, PS41. On the other hand, kapag yung grant is conditional, recognize mo as income only when condition is met. So, itong silang dalawa, masasabi mo na, under sila PS41. On the other hand, kapag yung grant mo relates to a biological asset measured at cost, yeah, PS220 na yan. PS20 na yan. Government grant that is conditional, but a portion of the grant is retained according to the time that has elapsed, recognize income using straight line method. So, ibangga nyo to sa concept na napag-usapan natin sa PS20 sa previously, yeah. Ito, additional notes na lang, encourage disclosure, etc. Read na lang. So, punta tayo sa application of concepts, mga kapatid. So, una, which of the following is outside the scope of PS41? Outside the scope daw, outside. So, dairy cattle used in the production of milk, that is a biological asset. Dairy cattle used in the production, so that, pero hindi naman siya bearer plant, bearer animal to siya. So, kasama yan. Chickens used in the production of meat. Okay, consumable yan. Animal na consumable. Kasi di ba? Tandaan nyo to. Siya na yun. Oh, consumable and bearer. Kapag bearer, automatic pag animal, whether that's consumable or bearer, that is biological asset. Oo. Kapag plant naman, tingnan mo muna kung consumable or bearer yan. Or dito, produce. Same lang yan. Consumable PR, produce. Para bago mo ma-distinct, pag consumable plants, PS41. Kapag bearer plant, that is PPE. So, letter C, rice plants and other crops that produce agricultural products only once. So, that is di ba? Consumable plant yan. Consumable plant yan. Diyan bearer plant, consumable plant. So, kasama yan. Within the scope yan ng PS41. On the other hand, itong letter D, mango trees and other plants that produce agricultural products repeatedly over a long period of time. So, ito, letter D, yan kasama. Outside of the scope PS41 yan. Which the following is considered as a biological asset? Carcass, ham, pig, piggy bank, pig. Whoop whoop, whoop whoop, oink oink. Which of the following is considered as agricultural produce? Ito, biological asset, to agricultural produce. Fruit cocktail, process na yun. Fruit tree. Pick or harvested fruit, dried fruit. Ito mas specific, fruit tree. Kasi ito, fruit cocktail, process na yan. Dried fruit, process na yan. Fruit tree, bearer plant yan. Pick or harvested fruit, agricultural produce yan. According to PS41, biological assets are measured as the follows. So, initial measurement and subsequent measurement. So, ang correct answer dyan, letter A lang. Biological asset yan eh. So, per value as cost sell and per value as cost sell. Di ba? Letter B, number 5. Which of the following statement is correct regarding the, correct ang hinahanap natin kapatid. Regarding the measurement of assets related to agricultural activity. So, una, so, biological assets are initially and subsequently measured at fair value. Dito lang sa taso, klarong-klaro, fair value less cost to sell. So, mali ito. Kulang. No gains or losses can arise on initial recognition of biological assets. Yes, there can be gains. May gains yan. Letter C, agricultural produce is initially and subsequently measured at fair value less cost to sell. Agricultural produce is initially and subsequently. Ito nagpapamali. Hindi na yan subsequently kasi kung subsequently na yan, after the point of harvest na yan, si agricultural produce. So, most probably, inventories na yan, IAS2 na yan, PAS2 na yan. Kaya, yung subsequently, hindi na yan. So, letter D, by power of deduction, di ba? Alam mo ng letter D without even reading. The gain or loss arising from initial measurement of the biological asset or agricultural produce is recognized in profit or loss. Yes, profit or loss yan siya. So, yan lang. Yan yung discussion natin for tag dito. For this midterms. So, this midterms. Kasi as you can see, yan yung last standard na PES. Kasi yung next standard natin dyan sa book ni Zeus, at least sa book ni Zeus is PFRS na. Kasi as you know, yung PAS, older yan sa PFRS. Kasi yung PFRS yung bago. Pero sinusunod pa rin yung mga hindi pa na-amend sa PAS, although older siya. Pero, basta ganun lang yan. PAS is older than the PFRS. So, with that, coverage ng midterm exam natin is all the PAS standards yung na-discuss natin. So, yun. From overview of accounting to PAS 41. Yung na-discuss natin. For midterm exam yan. So, after midterm exam, start na sa PFRS 1. Until sa end, sa PFRS insurance ata yung end or leases ata yung ending. PFRS 17 ba yan? PFRS 16. But anyways, yan yung ating lesson. And sa Thursday, gaya ng sabi ko kanina, sa previous lecture video, Thursday exam tayo. Okay? Ang coverage is yung lecture video na to, yung previous lecture video, and yung previous lecture video. So, tatlo sila. Exam natin sa Thursday. Sa Saturday, announce ko na ngayon, long quiz tayo sa Oblicon for the Chapter 4 ng Obligation. Okay? Chapter 4 ng Obligation, long quiz tayo sa Oblicon sa Saturday. Saturday next week kasi Good Friday pa lang ngayon. Baka sabihin nyo Saturday bukas. Saturday next week. Okay? With that, kung may questions man kayo, don't hesitate to ask sa GC natin. With that, goodbye. Love you.